Hi, everyone. Welcome to Knotch's Pros and Content Community and webinar on content and AI. My name is David Brown, and I'm Head of Strategy for Knotch. We like to think of ourselves as the leader in content intelligence. Some of you will know that our Pros and Content Community has been running this workshop series for almost 2 years now. Pros and Content Community is a private community where we share ideas and thoughts in a Slack community and through events. We have over 900 marketing and content leaders in that community. And if you'd like to join, please check us out. We're about to put the link into the comment section, knotch.com/pros and content community with hyphens between each of the last 4 words. We're really excited about the topic today because our world is rapidly changing because of the emergence of ChatGPT last November, bringing AI very much to the mainstream. There's a narrative emerging that AI is coming to replace us all. But we're seeing something different to that, more exciting than being replaced. And what we're seeing is that AI is really empowering people to do more and achieve greater success and actually be a lot happier in doing their work. And what's exciting for Knotch as a content intelligence platform is that AI is really shining a light on the importance of content. And it's a really important moment for marketing non-content leaders who often could be said to be struggling for credibility, is that this is a moment, and it's a moment for us to really take advantage of this increase in tension. Now, with all technologies, there are pitfalls to be avoided to ensure that AI isn't just out there creating a bunch of mediocre Me Too content. That's what Knotch is particularly passionate about, is helping companies create a distinct path forward and content which connects to business outcomes. As part of that, Knotch is actually launching an accelerator program with a small group of companies who want to embrace the combination of AI, content, and growth. And if you and your company is interested in discussing the accelerator program, please reach out to me via email at david.brown@knotch.com. We're aiming to have maybe 10 to 20 companies join almost as a consortium to help each other and Knotch make the right moves forward. I'd like to introduce a brilliant panel: Mallory Russell, VP of Global Content Marketing and Web at Square; Amanda Curtin, VP of Content and Social Media at Synchrony; Kevin Indig, our expert growth advisor, formerly head of SEO content at Shopify. Kevin is German and I'm English, so we went straight to the 1966 World Cup as we were preparing. And lastly, Aron, Tzimas, who's our co-founder of Knotch, our Chief Creative Officer and product leader. I'm going to start with Aron. Aron, why are you excited about generative AI?
Great question. To be honest, I think AI just as a technology really excites me generally. But I think specifically when it comes to generative AI, the thing that's really exciting is just AI-powered people and companies. When we're using it, it feels like we have a team of interns who are writers, strategists, performance marketers, data scientists, all in the one place and always available. And they need some supervision, but boy, do they save me a bunch of time in a lot of ways and help in a lot of aspects. I think 3 ways that I can think that I'm most excited about. There's a bunch of ways I can think of, but I don't want to take the whole hour for this question. The first one's really around efficiency and scale. I think about cost efficiency. Generative AI has the ability to create content drafts really quickly, like reducing the amount of human effort needed. I think of it as the blank page problem. I prefer to have something rather than staring at a blank page. It can knock out the initial 50 to 60% of the work that I do in seconds. And then I can spend all that time that I've saved doing things that matter, like polish, differentiation, quality. I think scaling content production in general is super important. We can produce large volumes of content quickly, which is great for if you have resource constraints or you have a lean company or team. I think consistency in brand voice really allows us to have and maintain uniform brand voices, which I think is crucial for brand identity. I don't know about everyone here listening, but I don't think the best use of my time is going through 2,000 articles to make sure they're the right tone and voice. The second bucket's around personalization and optimization. So I think about the ability to tailor content to specific audiences instantly or quickly. And instead of needing to rewrite everything, we can adapt one piece to many audiences and formats, as well as data-driven optimizations. And this is something that obviously being at Knotch is super important to us. Having content and generative content powered by performance metrics to make sure that we're writing content that performs well is super important. And that's something that can happen very fast with AI. And then the last point, which is probably a bit of a talking point, is I believe it empowers innovation and creativity. I don't think it inhibits it. I think it allows for creative experimentation. We can rapidly prototype different content formats, styles, tones, ideas. It can act as a thought partner to bounce ideas off. I really believe that the superpower around it is it frees up time for marketers to be creative and to focus on the things that matter and the things that are going to move the needle for the business. I can't even count the amount of times I said, I wish I had more time to spend on this. It would have been so much better. And I think this does give us that flexibility and time back to do things better at a high quality, at a high level. And I guess now marketers don't have any more excuses to do that. So I'll stop there.
Great. Thanks, Aron. Just on the subject of quality, I put a short story in the chat function about a study which MIT did in March. 444 business people with a writing test, half with ChatGPT and half without. And those with access to ChatGPT had greater success in quality. And interestingly, the range of scores narrowed. So the lower scored people rose in quality more than higher skilled people. So that could be another way of talking about commoditization or tightening up of skill levels. Now, Kevin, what are you excited about from your position?
Yeah, there's a lot to be excited about and also a lot to be afraid about. I don't know how you feel and everybody else joining. By the way, thanks for joining here. But I think we all feel this funny cocktail of fear and excitement at the same time. And it makes perfect sense when you look at how rapidly these models evolve. If you remember, November of last year is only 6-7 months ago. And that's when ChatGPT really saw the breakthrough, even though it's been out there for a while. But that's when it got so good that everybody was like, holy cow, we need to pay a lot more attention. And as a result, ChatGPT has become the fastest growing consumer product in history ever. I think it took them 5 days to reach 1 million users. I might butcher that slightly, but it's the fastest growing consumer product in the world. And so if you look at the parameters, the number of parameters that these models are being trained on and how fast they grow and improve in their capabilities, you see this exponential growth curve. It's absolutely mind-blowing. I think that's what makes everybody say, oof, this is exciting, but also it's a little bit intimidating because we're not sure how good it's going to get. Now, again, it's been 6 to 7 months since it really broke through. And I think now we're slowly reaching a moment where we can point at the place in the map that we're at, where we understand the true capabilities. And we learned that it is pretty good for certain things, but it's not good enough yet to completely replace content writers. And I would probably challenge that point that it's ever possible to completely replace writers, but it's probably very possible to completely replace poor writers or maybe below average writers. So there's a lot happening in all instances, right? It's not just writing, it's also images, video, fake news, much easier. So the space is growing very rapidly. And for us marketers, I think there are a couple of things that you can be incredibly excited about. One of them is certainly the whole idea of efficiency. It's not funny, but it's ironic that at the same time that we see this breakthrough technology, we're also going through a massive economic downturn. And I would argue that everybody on this call has to do more with less, which I know we're all tired of hearing, but you have to, you're not growing your team, or in rare instances are you actually growing your team. In most cases, you probably have to stimulate or trim your team down and cut budgets down. A lot of marketers are looking at AI in the hopes of compensating for that because the pressure is still there to grow. But then there's also this whole aspect of personalization. And that was a big hype about 10 years ago, but it never really lived up to the hype. We all thought, oh man, soon everybody who visits a website will have a different experience. That never really became true, but AI could actually make that true. And that's not just the case for websites, but also for ads. You could totally see a world in which almost every user sees a different ad based on their background and data. And that's possible with generative AI. And the last thing that I want to point out is just this whole idea of a competitive advantage. So since everything is moving so quickly right now, it opens the window for companies that move really fast and adopt this new technology to gain a massive competitive advantage over other companies, because people who understand how to use the technology, they can increase their output by 5, 10, maybe 100x, depending on what they do. And since innovation is always equally distributed across the world, we're going to probably see a bunch of companies who adopt this really fast and can move way faster than the competitors. I'm going to stop there because there's way more to be excited about, but I don't want to take the mic hostage for too long.
Thanks, Kevin. Yes, the idea of content quality is really important. And Knotch hears about that a lot because we are driving marketers to improve quality, because actually quality of content is really low. Even the best have an opportunity to grow more. And I'm going to share 2 stats just to make sure that everyone gets what that really means. Across all of our clients, maybe 20,000 pieces of content across 11 industries, 58% of content is either completely neutral or negatively affecting brand outcomes. So the majority of content is doing nothing for your brand. And in terms of engagement, 5% of content typically generates 90% of engagement. So said another way, 95% of content isn't really doing anything for you other than costing money to produce or create. So the opportunity here is to flip the 58% to get it to a minority and to grow your 5% just a little bit more and do that in a distinct way. Now, Amanda, I know you've been thinking deeply about generative AI in a regulated world that you live in. What are the opportunities and the use cases you're thinking about or considering?
Yes, certainly. And I think for financial services, there definitely is a need for caution in making sure that nothing proprietary or any personally identifiable information is out there through the use of AI, because we don't necessarily know how these engines are using what information they might capture from us. But to the points that Aron and Kevin were making, there's so much opportunity on the maybe grunt work end to take some of that research and outlining and preparation of taking ideas and filling them out and fleshing it into something you can then turn over to a human writer. That really excites me, because we have an opportunity to take some of the tedious work of searching and getting ideas and instead making it a conversation with something like ChatGPT, where you say, give me 10 items that people should consider when retiring. And then when you see the list, say, give me 10 more, and just continuing that conversation, digging deeper into areas, and then turning that into kind of an outline you could use for something future state. And then the other thing I think Aron mentioned as well is once we get to a point of having our own proprietary versions of these, which I think is probably where things would need to head, is people would need to have their own generative AI that's a closed environment for the security of the companies. How can you teach it your brand voice? How can you feed it your brand? And then you can make sure, like, that last check before something goes live is done instantaneously to make sure that it's on brand. So it's that work that maybe isn't as exciting, isn't as creative, and doesn't really bring to life what a human can provide as value, that machines can actually bring to making the work more interesting and making it more time on the creative pieces.
Yeah. Amanda, thanks for that. You have several business units within Synchrony, and you're responsible for content across the board. How do you possibly keep track of it all? You must have hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces of content. Do you have an audit team constantly?
We don't at the moment. I think that that's another piece that has fallen heavily on my team. We do have an editorial council that meets once a month to share what's going on and make sure that We have visibility into everything. That gives us a chance to provide that visibility across the businesses that aren't involved in one piece. And we can raise any issues or ideas or cross-promotion opportunities through that.
That's great. Mallory, you have an interesting purview because you have global responsibilities, multiple markets. But what are you thinking about for use cases for generative AI?
Yeah, we've been discussing generative AI within our marketing team for quite some time. I think it's a really interesting tool, and that's really the framing I like to think about it as. Like, the tool is only as good as the person wielding it. And so being really thoughtful about how it can best support our business has been the focus for us. For me, I think using it to help figure out the impact of the content and what kind of behaviors it's causing is a really interesting use case. We use our content across every channel at Square, and getting a really accurate picture of that impact is difficult, and making connections between behaviors and those channels and that content is tough to do with an analyst, and we have limited analyst capabilities. So I think using AI to sort through huge data sets to help us make those connections is super fascinating. I'm really interested in that. We're also thinking a lot about how we might use this to test content, because we are global. We work in a global planning and production process for content. A lot of the content is localized, but that doesn't mean it's always used the same way. Some of it's hybridized, and understanding how we can test headlines in different markets really fast and easily without a person sitting there and doing it is really interesting for me. So we're getting the most use out of it in these different markets where these things might need to be framed slightly differently. The other part of this that I think is really fascinating is the kind of ideation of content using something like ChatGPT, maybe not in the way people usually talk about it, because someone smartly pointed out in the comments, it pulls from what is, not what could be. It's telling you what already exists in terms of content, and it's compiling that in one place. I think there's a lot of opportunity to find the white space, the things that people aren't talking about in these topics. And so that's an area I'm interested in terms of ideation. I tend to agree with Kevin that I don't think it can ever replace a great writer. Having worked with some of the content coming out of something like ChatGPT, I think structure is the foundation and the key to great content. And that's not something that you always get great structure from AI. So I think there's still definitely a place for the involvement in all of this, but I do think if you use it really smart and specifically, you can get a lot of benefit and maybe break into space that people aren't touching yet. And that's really the goal. There's too much content in the world already. We want things that stand out and make impact.
That's right. Aron and I were talking earlier about how to be different and how to be one in a million. And that sounds like an impossible task. But actually, if you break it down, you just need to be 1 in 10 times over. So be 1 in 10 for identity, be 1 in 10 for tone of voice, be 1 in 10 for topics, be 1 in 10 for themes, be 1 in 10 for channels. If you bring these all together, you can take a distinct path. Kevin, as you think about distinctness versus the forces of generative AI, which are commoditizing, how do you protect a brand and make sure that a distinctness is improved rather than diluted?
Yeah, I love that question because I think it's an engineering problem and not a creative problem. And I think we often see distinctness and differentiation as, oh, we just need to be very creative and smart about it. But I don't think that's true. I think instead, first of all, you need to have awareness of what's even out there. And that's where a lot of people, unfortunately, in companies already come short. Take inventory of what does the red ocean look like before you can even paint a picture of what the blue ocean should be. That's one aspect. And I would argue that AI can help you do that. The newest iterations of ChatGPT allow you to query the web with a plugin, with the Bing plugin. And you can just ask it, okay, here are some important keywords. For those keywords, look at the top 10 results and show me what do all these have in common and what are the gaps compared to maybe a book about the topic, right? The crazy thing about AI is you can be multimodal. You can jump between videos, books, PDFs, text. It's all, you have a much vaster pool to pull from. The other thing is that I think first of all, you can train ChatGPT and other AI tools on your content. There are out-of-the-box tools, or you can use ChatGPT and just tell it, hey, look at these 3 pieces that I've written. You can provide it links to your content and say, given that brand voice, write a new article. I also want to point out that a lot of people use their prompts way too sparingly. I think a really good prompt, and maybe I shouldn't call it, maybe I shouldn't say it this way, because then everybody will say, oh, Kevin said a good prompt is long. But my message here is that your prompts are probably too short. I get some really good results when I have prompts that are over a single page long. You are very specific in what you want the machine to do. And I think that's a skill that we as people need to learn, is prompting, because you need to be almost like this hyper intelligent child, which will do exactly what you tell it to do, but you need to paint all the constraints and boundaries for it, right? So you need to tell it, don't start the sentence with the same word every time. Don't use passive voice. There's a whole list of things. And I would argue that if you can draw effective boundaries and show the machine what type of brand voice and style you want, then it gets really good at creating that. But again, it's all a matter of knowing first of what differentiation even looks like.
Yeah, I was going to say, Kevin, to that point, when people talk about our writers going to lose their jobs, I'm like, if you're a really good communicator and writer, you're probably going to be better at writing what you need from the AI. So I think they're actually going to be more demand.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like an amplification of everything you do. If you're bad, it will amplify that output. And if you're amazing and outstanding, it will amplify that output. So that's why I think AI leads to a bigger inequality, because the best will get even better and the worst will get the worse.
Yeah, that's a good point. If David Ogilvy was still alive, rather than saying, write a brilliant 1-page brief, he would say, write a brilliant 1-page prompt. In fact, you could say the creative brief and the prompt are going to come together, and it'd be interesting to see whether the brief writers, do they actually become creative, or do the true creative teams, do they actually write the briefs or write the prompts? Be an interesting collaboration. Now, the elephant in the room, of course, is that generative AI is brilliantly fluent, and when you hear or read something which is very fluent, you immediately believe that it's true, honest, legal, decent, and fair. And of course, that's not always the case. Mallory, potentially as our skeptic in the room, I'm not encouraging you down that path, but can you keep it real for us? What protections are you thinking about to get to the truth?
Yeah, today I'm a cautious optimist, but I am cautious because I think that is right. And this isn't the only place you see this, right? Like the same thing has happened on social media, that because there's an article that looks official and it has a headline, people believe what it is, and it can be completely fake. So there has to be, generally, I think, in our culture, a bigger move toward media literacy. But I think that you have to take that into a content marketing role too. Most people probably, when they're publishing, have a set of reviews that happen with legal potentially or copy edit. I think the role of a fact checker becomes really important, because the thing about AI is that you're getting it potentially not with all the sources attached to it. And so you have to have someone going in and really doing their research to make sure those things are through. So I think just like what we were talking about is like there's maybe a change in skill set in some of these roles. I think the roles and responsibilities expand, or maybe there's new roles that come to be because of it. That is interesting, and probably actually just really great generally for the industry, because I don't know that we've always been doing our job, or a lot of brands have been doing their job. I think we do a pretty good job at Square, fact checking all the information we're getting as we do research anyway. There's lots of people using old data that sounds proliferated across sites that may not be contextualized appropriately. So I think that can be a really positive change actually brought about by AI.
Sounds good. And it's great to meet your family as well, Mallory. So well done for keeping all the balls juggling. Now, Mallory, you're in the technology world, connected to financial services. Amanda, you are in a bank, regulated with compliance. What are your legal teams thinking of doing in terms of workflow changes or hardening the approach there?
Yeah, right now we are paused on using generative AI at work. I think it's just everything happened very quickly. We want to be cautious optimists and make sure that there is a way to make sure that everything that comes in through that or that we share through AI programs is secure and safe, and that nothing is put out there that shouldn't be. And so we're not doing it right now, but there is a lot of conversation happening in the company about how we can do this safely and securely. Because I think to what you were saying and Mallory was saying, there are inherent biases that are in a lot of what's out on the web, and the AI is only as good as its sources. And then you also have the considerations of fact checking them. Just myself on my own, I did some work and just checked, said, give me the list of great places to retire with swimming pools or whatever. And when I checked, half of the swimming pools that ChatGPT listed were in hotels and other areas. And the facts aren't necessarily the facts, even though they sound authoritative. So you have to have some guardrails in place, and everyone has to be comfortable with those guardrails in order to move forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. No thoughts about retiring, though. You have to keep working for now.
Yes, no swimming pools for me.
There's a question for the panel which came in from Craig Brockman. Maybe Aron, you could take this. A big aspect of generative AI is around image creation and video creation. How are you thinking about that, Aron, compared to the written word? What's the opportunity from a visual perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, again, it comes to a few things. I think one is obviously speed, and it's a fast curator. When you're looking for images, you're either hiring a designer, and my background in design, I can talk about this and not feel bad about it, but you can hire a designer, which is expensive. But even bringing in a designer, you need to curate what you're looking for, right? What type of designer, what's their style? And then you need to, for lack of a better word, prompt them to make sure you're getting the output back from them. And I'm not saying don't hire designers, please do, or else I'd be out of a job. But I think it allows for a really quick curation at the very least through to creation of the finished product. So I think it helps in that way from just a purely, here's something new. When it comes to editing imagery, I think it's super helpful, right? There's so much retouching and work that goes into someone taking a photo, or maybe there's a watermark you need to add or remove. Maybe you have a crop. And again, you've got these amazing photographers who've done your whole campaign, and then you need to put an image on a page and you're like, this is too tightly cropped. I need to expand it. So you can use AI to help expand the shot. So I don't think it just falls in the bucket of generating new content. I think there's a lot of iteration that can happen through the help with AI. And video similarly, I think video editing, you create the video, but then you're like, all right, I need this as a 30-second TikTok, or I need this as a 5-minute long form content piece. So I think there's a lot of opportunities when it comes to either generative design or creative, whether that's video or imagery.
Great, thanks, Aron. Kevin, are there any early results you can share, either things you've worked on directly or that you've observed in your discussions with companies?
Yeah, there's a very fast-growing fintech startup that I worked with for about a year, and we ran all sorts of AI content experiments. And I do want to point out that finance is a regulated industry, like medical and like legal and some others. So we have to be incredibly careful. And that might look like a slowdown, but I would argue that there are worlds where you can align with the legal team on boundaries and ways to move forward and not constantly butt heads, but it takes a deliberate conversation. So anyway, we tried all sorts of AI created content, and it was generally more successful than we expected it to be. I want to point out also that none of this was published raw, right? This all went through editors and fact checkers, but the time it took from start to finish, door to door, was probably cut down by 90%. So a huge time saving. And a lot of this was very non-creative content in the sense that, for example, we built a glossary with AI. And I think glossary is a perfect application because the boundaries are pretty clear. Right? You're not asking AI to come up with a marketing strategy. You're asking it for a definition of a word. And that definition, of course, has to be correct and clear and helpful. But that's a perfect playground for AI. And this glossary generated pipeline. And we're talking about $1 million deals. And I wouldn't say that every glossary does that in the world, right? So I want to point out that this was just one company, right? N equals 1, so don't draw away too thick of conclusions. But it is not impossible to make AI content good enough for people to say, oh, this company, I want to talk to them. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of other processes that happens in the meantime, like touch points with salespeople that decide whether actually the deal closes or not. A lot of nuance here. But even when we talk about things like sales calls, one kind of really interesting thing or capability that AI enables you to do is to just better understand your customers. So another thing that we did with this company is we took a whole bunch of sales call transcripts and customer support call transcripts and fed them into AI. And then you're able to query those transcripts and ask it, what are the pain points that most people mention? Or what are the things that people are looking for in the product that this company is selling? And you get a really good answer. Customer research accelerates, and you start to make sources accessible to marketers that previously have been super tedious to access. And the meta point that I want to make here is AI goes both ways. It's not just about the output and the things we create. It's also in helping us get better information. And I've since replicated similar plays with other companies that have also seen really good traffic increases. But it always depends on what the actual business model is. Again, a company that has a sales team in between, that there's obviously a different impact from content and traffic than a company that has a self-serve product or is a consumer product.
Yeah, great points. You made the point about the industry losing patience with personalization. And I've got a feeling that generative AI can help with that. So what we've seen is that creative teams just don't have the appetite for creating hundreds or thousands of versions of modular content or content atoms. They're good with the core concept and maybe 5 or 10. But if you say, can you do this 50 times and then change it in real time on a monthly basis, they say someone else can do that. And then that work goes offshore and it then slows down and people say, we're just going to stop on personalization. But I think AI changes that, because AI can be built into personalization engines and can do that work for us, so that a core concept goes in, and then as it gets modulated at various journey stages or to need states, the machines can do that work, and then we can approve it rather than actually writing it and doing it in a separate workflow.
Yeah, I want to give you a quick example, David, and I don't want to take time from the other speakers, but I think this is interesting, where I spoke about advertising before, and I think there's a real opportunity to personalize advertising to a much larger degree than we ever thought. Imagine, for example, you're, say, in insurance and you sell home insurance, and in your ads, or even in your content and landing pages, it doesn't have to be advertising, you show, say, a family sitting around the table and something, I don't know, a little baby breaks something, and that's the case for home insurance. Now, what if I were able to understand where the user is calling from, or I could even understand what skin color the user has who visits the landing page, and then adjust the picture where it's maybe not an Asian family, but it's a family of color, or it's a Caucasian family. And these are things that are not crazy at all, but that generative AI can do extremely well. And so that's why I'm saying I think there is a whole new era of personalization waiting to happen.
Yeah, and I think, just to take that a step further, when you think about search engines and how they're starting to offer more of this interactive AI-based, question-based interface, and people are able to ask questions and get responses, if they get more used to doing that, if you can do the same thing on your website and have the content they're looking for available, you can serve up just the pieces they're looking for. So you could create long form content with all of the answers. But then if someone comes to you and they give you a little bit of information about what they're looking for, the AI can pull just the pieces they need and highlight for them the same way that it does with the open web today, so that your site visitors get a personalized experience in that way too, as people get more used to asking questions to receive an answer.
Yeah, that's right. Now, Amanda, you made the point that you're on hold at Synchrony at the moment. But yeah. I know that you've done a lot of research and evangelizing behind this. What early results have you seen, maybe in other areas, that you think would be worth sharing?
Yeah, so in the early days of November, my team, strictly looking at blog content they were creating, public facing, based on information that's already out there on the web, but to Mallory's point, trying to find some of that white space. We did do some testing with ChatGPT in just outline creation. And how can we take some of those early pieces of the work and turn them over to a writer? And that cut down the amount of time spent on outlines and research about 70% on average. We're hoping to find a way forward in the future to continue that work, because it was a substantial cost savings on some of those upfront pieces that then gave us the chance to focus more on what's our POV, what's our personal piece that we want to add to this content that's out there.
If you were to predict the cost per piece of content,
Oh, no.
not to say absolute numbers, but say it was $100, what do you think the cost per will drop to because of the productivity improvements?
I think that's a little hard to say, but if you think about hours of my team's time spent on research and things, or I think someone mentioned earlier, I think Aron, maybe it's like having a whole staff of interns working for you. If I don't have an intern working for me, maybe it's the value of that hiring an intern now that you have through the AI.
That's right. And really, we're all interns anyway. We're all working for someone doing
we're all
doing work.
interns in one way or another.
That's right. Just to the audience, if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A button, because we're going to start taking questions from the audience. Don't use the chat, but just move to the right and use the Q&A. A question from Anne Merkert from DocuSign. Curious, in the case Kevin mentioned about putting call center transcripts into generative AI, should a company be concerned that their call center data is now out there for a competitor to do something clever to say, look what this company A just did, which means that they could reveal either a strength or a vulnerability? What's your perspective on that?
I would go with a third-party tool like Humata AI. That's one that I've been playing with, because even Google directed their employees to be very careful with what they prompt Bard, and they shouldn't use sensitive information, which should make you think. And so I would work with I would not go to ChatGPT, Bing, or Bard. I would use a third-party application that is specialized in PDF querying. And again, the one that I've used, there are plenty out there. I'm not affiliated in any way, but it's called Humata AI. And I would go with that because the likelihood that they're storing prompts, if they log them in their own database, is much, much higher.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, David, I think it's a really important point. It's very early on, right? Even though it feels forever. And compliance, security, and governance is the thing that comes up the most when we're speaking to people around AI. And at Knotch, we're working on AI quite a bit and been thinking about it for a while, and we're building quite a lot. And as David mentioned, we have our AI Accelerator program. So if anyone's interested, please sign up by sending David an email. He's going to get lots of personal emails. But that's one of the main things that comes up is like, how do we know where our data is going? How do we know where our information is going? And that's why it's really important to have a private instance of an LM that you're using, or an AI, for each company. And it's not only because it's protecting where your data is going, but that fine-tuned private instance means it has your brand tone, it has your security guidelines, financial services, it has all the information that you need about all the products and all the things you can say and can't say. So I think that's the direction. I'm pretty confident that's the direction it's going to move. And working with trusted companies who have that, I think, is going to be honestly the first checklist whenever any SaaS AI platform is going to be speaking to big brands, especially in regulated industries.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The other point we see is measurement is truly the Achilles heel of the marketing and content arena. And measurement just got even more important, because if we really want to know how well are we doing using generative AI, then that puts even more pressure on your measurement systems to show you pre and post, or A versus B, or whatever it is. So just be looking at your measurement frameworks and make sure your toolkit is ready to help you do that comparison. Mallory, there's a question for you from Rachel around localization. Can you see that question in the Q&A button?
Yes, I can. I'm reading through it now. So you're using AI for localization along with humans. So we're actually not using AI across any of these areas right now. I think there's a lot of potential for testing headlines and other parts of the content experience that like draw people in and engage them. We're in a similar boat on trying to figure out the kind of legal requirements that need to be in place and all of that, because we're in a regulated industry. But I think it's something it would be such a great use case for it. It would allow for more personalization. I totally agree on AI really making personalization an option, where I think it's just been too manual to this point, and that's why it hasn't really worked in the way that everyone thought it would. And this makes it not manual, it makes it feasible for any company to start doing. So we haven't yet, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to do it. And I come from I worked at some publications before where we did like manual headline testing. We'd sit there and watch the article in the first 5 minutes and then start changing out headlines. We had lists of them. And I just think about if we could just program that into the content management system to start doing that kind of automatically, it'd be amazing. And we really start to understand what our audiences want from us, how we can impact them with things like headlines, images, any number of aspects of a content piece.
Yeah. Great answer. There's a question from a first-time caller, Michael Rovner, long-time listener. Who is driving the conversation around AI and marketing or content? Is it the CMO or the CTO or someone else? Who wants to take that? I can say that from a Knotch point of view, the person who is being asked to do more with less probably has a motivation. Amanda, what do you think? Well,
I just think there's so much interest where I am that it's going both ways. And certainly on the technology side, there's interest. And the marketing side, there's interest. If it's even on a slide that I'm presenting, the whole conversation gets derailed. So I think everybody's really very engaged and very committed to finding a way forward. It's just making sure that we're thoughtful about how we do it and that we're protecting our company and our customers. So I think there are a lot of people who are in it together rather than one person pushing another to do it.
That's right. And that's the opportunity for content teams, is all of a sudden we're at the big boy and big girls table to really think this through, rather than being held outside the room looking after a satellite blog. So it is a real moment. Kevin, there's a question for you on search. What are the implications for SEO traffic strategies, given your background at Search Metrics and Shopify? What do you think is coming?
Yeah, if I perfectly knew, I would bet a lot of money. But it's in a lot of cases still up in the air. What we do know it's coming is that all major search engines are testing ways to give answers directly with AI. And I am one of the lucky people who have access to Google's SGE, which stands for Search Generative Experience, and it's the beta program for Google's new AI answers. And what you see there can give you goosebumps, as in that Google answers a lot more of the question than just sending users to web results. And that will massively disrupt the web ecosystem from all sides, whether it's publishers, retailers, SaaS companies. And too few companies are thinking about risk contingency plans or how to de-risk the future, at least to some degree. And I think Amanda made a really good point when earlier she said, we basically have to start now to provide exceptional experiences on our websites, whether that's with content or user experience or widgets or interactives. There's a lot of stuff that can be done to train users to come to our sites directly. And I don't want to paint a scenario of SEO is going away and Google will send no more traffic, but it's likely to be less in the future than more. The trend is not going upwards. And so you want to figure out how can you train users to come to your site directly, how can you get them signed up for email lists or bring them into environments you can control much better and where you're less dependent. That being said, as I mentioned earlier, AI goes both ways, and our AI tools also get massively better. It's much easier to create programmatic content at scale, which is not the same as editorial content, right? I'm talking about structured content at scale, which I'm working and testing on with a few clients. And we can create amazing chatbots now that really help users in their problems and accelerate the user journey. Plus, we get a lot of cool data out of that. So we can build cool new tools and other things that are super helpful for users. And so, yeah, the long and short is a lot of change on the horizon. Nobody knows exactly how it's going to play out, but the smart companies and smart teams, they start planning for the worst case scenario now.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that's something my team's been talking about for a while for a number of reasons. It's not just generative AI, it's privacy, it's the changing nature of consumers and where they consume content. Gen Z doesn't really like to go to search engines. They go to YouTube and TikTok, which are search engines in and of themselves, just a very different kind. And so I think content marketing generally is probably overinvested in organic search tactics. That doesn't mean that like the organic search teams don't have a place. And I was telling Kevin this earlier, but like we've actually changed the name of our team from an SEO team to organic discovery. And we're encouraging them to go out and find other places where people discover content organically. And let's start thinking about that broader mix of channels. I think it's a really exciting time because there's so much opportunity to be innovative. And then it also maybe helps refocus, like you said, there's a lot of room here for structured content on the editorial side of the house. It gives you a lot of space to bring a lot more of your opinions, of your perspective, things that are truly unique into your content, and finding other place to put those, really acting more like a publisher. And that's how you get people trained to come back to your site again and again, is if you're providing that extreme, unique perspective and value back to them.
Yeah, that's great. That's a fantastic idea on the name. It reminds me, within the pros and content community, there was a question about what should I call my content team? Because I don't want to call it content, because in this company, content means cheap, nasty, low quality. And the idea emerged of calling it the audience engagement team, or something around what content's role is, rather than using content, which is truly a damaged word. There's a really interesting question from Todd at Colgate. Todd is asking about grammar and quality. Do you think we're going to get to a better grammatical place, a better Oxford comma, skeptical with a C versus skeptical with a K? Is there hope amongst the English students that language skills are going to improve, or quality?
I hope so, but to be honest, my English is different from Americans' English anyway, so I think it's completely wrong when I read most of the words here anyway. But I think it's an interesting question, because I think there's a lot of opportunities depending on how you use AI as a tool, right? You could use it as a learning tool. But I think with a lot of technology, there's always been skepticism and then reality. So there's either like negatives where people think it can go, and positives, and it really depends on how people use the technology. If you just think about writing in general, there was the printing press and people were like, oh, this is going to devalue writing, it's too much information. And then it democratized knowledge and sparked a renaissance across things. And then there was like the typewriter, and then that was like penmanship's gone, right? So similar to grammar. And what did it do? It increased efficiency. More people had access, legibility, people were spelling better. And then computers, obviously lots when that came in, as well as spell check with computers. And I think that's really connected to what you said, Todd. Did spell check make people worse writers, or a bit worse at grammar or better at grammar? I think at the very least now I know how to spell the words I didn't know how, even though I don't type them myself, but I'll right click that red underline. And then I think when it comes to AI, it's similar. You can use anything for good and bad. So I'm a big believer that when, and I believe people will, use AI for good, I think it's just going to show that, history has always shown some technology skepticism, and then society adapts. So it really is up to the thought leaders and the leaders in the space using it to make sure that what we do with AI is for good.
Great. On that note, I'm going to say thank you very much, Mallory, Amanda, Kevin, and Aron, for being on Knotch's Pros and Content panel. We've held the attention of over 140 people for an hour, so I think we've done a great job. I've learned a huge amount. We're going to write a series of key takeaways to share If you're interested in joining the Pros and Content community or accelerator program, please send me an email to david.brown@knotch.com, Knotch with a K. And I hope everyone has a good rest of the day, and please do stay in touch. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, panel.
Thanks,
David,
Tom.
when are you going to tell everyone that we're just AI generated? Thanks, everyone. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Terminator 4. Bye, everyone.